What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy. What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. I came across some recent comments from Nick Bosa about our new defensive coordinator, Steve Wilks, and it raised an eyebrow for me, right? It was a critique, right? It's very limited, excuse me, statement even provided, but it did give me a bit of a warning flag, right? Not a huge caution point, but something we'll want to monitor and be aware of as the season progresses, especially considering some of the most likely holes on this roster that we're going to see rear its head this season, even with the scheme change and even with the different concepts we'll be using to try to mask it up. And hopefully you have some guys to step up to the plate and all that kind of stuff. But still, for Steve Wilks, who's historically been known to be a defensive back expert and someone that's not necessarily elite in terms of developing a front seven or being able to get these guys to overachieve, this is something that intrigued me. So Nick Bosa's comment specifically said, I think he does a great job with the back end. Obviously, we had some issues this year throughout the year. And this came from the standpoint of, I believe these were comments directly after, at some point in time, the end of the year for them in 2023. We know Steve Wilks got fired. We know there's a lot of mystery around why he kind of ended up being the black sheep or the scapegoat there for the season. But ultimately, based on historical performance, the defense woefully underachieved. Yes, they still reached the Super Bowl and stuff, but there's a lot of things directly tied into Steve Wilks and even Shanahan. If you want to give him criticism here, there was a lot of bridging the gap between the coach they selected and what was going to be happening with that defense, right? The 49ers, coming off of the Robert Saleh tenure, their DNA is 4-3 defense, right? They're infused to rush with four, drop back seven, and this is the way we're going to play the game and try to dictate things up front. And that didn't really jive necessarily with what Steve Wilks was acclimated to, right? 3-4 defenses. We're sending blitzes. We're sending pressure from all different areas, different players, safeties coming up, et cetera, et cetera. So they ultimately tried to fuse these two concepts together. And it's going to be one of the hardest things to pull off and accomplish because you have guys that are acclimated to operate in a certain way. And now you're trying to give them 3-4 principles, or now you're asking certain guys to rush when even from a physical skill set standpoint, these might be guys that are better for coverage. These might be better run and hit type guys, right? So the struggle with that is you don't necessarily get to hone in on an archetype, right? You don't get to hone in on what kind of skill set is best acclimated to this because you're trying to go 50-50 with two elements that don't necessarily work together, right? For that 49ers defensive team, it was like mixing oil and water and trying to get, a new liquid out of it, if you will. Now, the more recent comments from Nick Bosa about Robert Saleh returning as the defensive coordinator, and don't forget there was an overlap between Robert Saleh and Nick Bosa in Bosa's rookie year. He mentioned his commanding presence in defensive meetings is what we needed. And so this is what really kind of raised that eyebrow for me initially, right? What does this mean for Steve Wilks, who's a coach that has ample experience, even 2 years ago? Ample experience, obviously, is a well-respected member just throughout the coaching, not carousel, but coaching community in the NFL. And there's a reason why Aaron Glenn would have been looking to rely on him as well. The previous head coaching opportunities that he would have received. It's hard to fathom that this is a guy that's kind of being walked over or, excuse me, guys aren't necessarily responding. But if you take it from the standpoint of I'm in the front seven, I don't fit into what you want to do up front with this blitzing and these different scenarios that are going to occur, I'm going to be put in a bad situation the majority of the times I'm out there on the field, right? So you have these guys that are already starting to kind of check out maybe in their brains. They're going out there, they're losing games, plays they probably felt like they would have made before. They're either not put in position to or they're being played out of position. And so, it causes a lot of resentment or dissension, not just within the team itself, but of course with the guy that's supposed to be coordinating the whole thing. And so coming not freshly off, but in my brain, anytime I think of coaching issues, I still recall Quinnen Williams and defensive line coach Aaron Whitecotton getting into it, right? What happens during the regular season where, and by the way, before we even get into that, we'll come back to that example there, but the 49ers and Steve Wilks combination kind of seemed like it was destined to fail, right? So the fact that they reached the Super Bowl was pretty impressive still. But Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilks are a much more manageable or compatible duo to piece together. Glenn definitely operated a lot of blitzing schematics within what he did with Detroit. And also, we can't forget, as those injuries racked up, there were multiple different phases of how he rolled out and deployed. So he's a guy that's very fluid in terms of being able to open things up and still try to put these guys that are coming off of the street in a situation. So considering the improvements in defense for both of these guys compared to where they've been previously, this is a boost. So Steve Wilks, Aaron Glenn, 4-3-3-4, not as much of a concern. Blitzing, not much of a concern. These are guys that are going to be able to be crafty and innovative and stuff like this, as we've seen with Quincy and Jamie in blitzing, Andre Cisco being able to come off the edge and do some stuff. So not as much concern there. But going back into the scenario, what happens during the regular season when the defensive line is kind of being ran all over, right? And maybe the blitzing is working in terms of the pass rushing, but it's not helping plug those gaps that maybe are being left behind by whoever's partnered up next to Quentin Williams, right? Or Byron Coward, or maybe guys are looking to attack the outside, excuse me, edge. And we're seeing that they're having success there and is limiting our ability to be able to counter and be proactive against certain concepts as opposed to being reactive. It's not that long ago. Quentin Williams blew up on defensive line coach Aaron Whitecotton, right? And this was over. I think this was at a time where we were still trying to get acclimated to the defensive rotation, or they were starting to blitz more in that game. And, Quentin Williams was saying, put basically what he came out saying after the fact when asked was that he wanted Aaron Whitecotton to put the pressure back on the defensive line. And then if things continue to fail, there's a conversation that could be had there. But if that could happen to White Cotton, and the last regime, at least defensively, was one that every player on that staff really, really loved and connected with. What happens with Steve Wilks, who's not as adjusted, right? You have an entirely new staff that's coming in. I think Aaron Glenn puts a kind of a cap on how much turmoil there possibly could be based on the way that we've seen him react and respond to a lot of situations currently. But I'm curious how Nick Bosa's comments translates to the meeting room, right? Would that only be specific to the front seven where maybe there's a little less certainty from Steve Wilks? Or is the fact that we're going to be adopting a scheme that he's comfortable with and stuff allows him to go back in and speak to these guys with confidence and determination and be able to prove to them these are concepts that we know that work. Here's why, and I can show you film and I can back this up with other things. Ultimately, though, when it comes to Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilks, I feel like there's a good kind of exchange in terms of what they can both offer someone. So let's play devil's advocate and say that these are similar things that we can expect to impact Steve Wilks here. You have your veterans, of course, your Quincy's, Jamie, and now Quentin Williams up there, even your Byron Cowards and your Derek Notties and stuff. You have a lot of veterans that maybe would be more willing to speak up and push back against someone like a Steve Wilks if things are going south. Aaron Glenn is there as kind of that commanding presence to let them know this isn't about the scheme, as we've always said. This is about playing style, and this is about commitment to the process. In OTAs, in training camp, we did all of the things necessary to put you guys in a position to succeed. It's about executing now. And yeah, maybe we don't have the talent or the situations we like in all settings to be able to just dominate from start to finish, but we should be winning more of these situations than not. So for me, I will be keeping a pretty watchful eye about how this defense is responding in the event that we are kind of being bullied in the run game and seeing what the response from Steve Wilks to the front seven is, or even specifically the defensive line, and seeing what that ultimately ends up looking like, right? For the most part, things have been on an upward trend, and we haven't heard anybody really saying that this may be an issue or really calling out any kind of concerns with what's been going on so far. But let me know what you guys think. Steve Wilks, what's your confidence level in him being able to get this defense back to where we've kind of seen it with the heights of Robert Saleh, or even overachieve beyond that? Or are you still significantly concerned about some of our lack of talent in terms of being able to stop run defense and what that'll look like? And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.